So, the Amazing Digital Circus episode 5 came out. And I've been an Amazing Digital Circus fan for a little while now, but I watched episode 5 and I went, ooh, if I don't make a video essay on this, I'm going to explode.
Wait, what?
I had so many ideas for topics and theses that I could use to make a video essay on this show. I had like a whole list in a notes app in my phone. Most of them probably didn't even make sense. But how was I going to make a video essay on this without spiraling into abstraction with all the things I wanted to talk about, all the things you may have missed, all the things that I noticed, how the characters influence the world building and the world building influences the characters and they're so interlocked. How could I limit myself to what to talk about? I limit myself to analysing a scene that is less than 2 minutes long. Today I want to talk about Kaufmo's funeral scene and how it almost entirely sums up every character in that one scene. You've probably forgotten this scene. It's right at the end of episode 2 after Gummy explodes into confetti.
Wait, what?
And Pomni has another mental breakdown. It's an interesting sentence to say out loud. Before we get into the scene, I first want to establish something that I really admire about the writing of this show, because that's what's really showcased in this scene. I believe that a good writer should know everything about their character, but also understands that the audience doesn't need to know everything about their character. I went to an author panel at Supernova recently where one of the authors explained this really well. When talking about world building techniques, she explained that if she decides one of her characters wears perfume, she then needs to think about how would this perfume be made in this fantasy world? What ingredients would be used? Where would this character purchase such perfume for? And they need to have an understanding of all these things so that the world feels grounded in reality and has continuity. However, the reader doesn't need to know every detail about how the character procured this perfume, because that would be boring. And I believe the same applies to your characters. Going into the story, you should know everything about your characters, but the audience or your reader doesn't need to know their whole life story straight away. By knowing your characters well, elements of them will naturally bleed into the story, developing your audience's understanding of them without forcing their life story onto the audience in the opening scene or first chapter. The Amazing Digital Circus does this perfectly. For example, Kinga's first line in the show is, "Did somebody say something about an insect collection?"
Did someone say something about an insect collection?
A sentence we don't fully understand the meaning of until episode 3, but it's still in there. This sets up King is crazy, what's he talking about an insect collection for? But also shows that from the beginning, King is always thinking about his wife. In fact, Kinga's wife is shown in episode 1. One of the most significant scenes in all of the pilot is Jax, Pomni, and Ragatha walking down all of the bedrooms. And these doors are quite revealing. We can see the door to Kinga's wife's room right next to Kinga's. This queen chess piece with a red X over it. Gooseworks knows these characters and their motivations and their backstory and their intentions before these episodes release, and integrates elements of them into the background of the story without you even knowing. If you've only watched these episodes once, you're missing out. You have to watch them again. Every time I rewatch an episode, I notice something different. I learn something new. Especially now that episode 5 has come out and we now know new Jax details. Because there is a moment in Kaufmo's funeral scene that can only be fully understood now that episode 5 is out. And you probably missed it. Let's go through this scene one character at a time, and let's start with Zooble. Now, Zooble is absent a lot of this episode because they skip out on the Candy Canyon Kingdom adventure. Upon returning to the circus, just after Gummy explodes, Zooble appears and says that they got everything ready. Sneaking around Caine, Zooble spent that time organising Kaufmo's funeral for everyone. This is pretty telling of Zooble's character. Zooble is intentionally dissonant from the adventures and the world around them. While Jax represents absolute acceptance of the pointlessness of the world around him by giving in to the adventures and the absurdity of the world, Zooble represents acceptance of the pointlessness of the circus in a different way. Zooble actively defies Caine, rejects the adventures, and instead focuses on what's actually real, the people around them. Zooble is the one who reaches out to Gangle, the character who is picked on the most. Zooble is the one who calls out Jax the most. Zooble is also quite gentle with Pomni, being new. It makes the most sense that Zooble is the one to take the time to set up Kaufmo's funeral. Zooble's choice of body parts for this episode is also relevant to this scene. Zooble's detachable parts change in every episode in a quite subtle way that a lot of the time you don't really notice. It's a way to depict Zooble's struggle with their body, likely representing gender dysphoria. This episode they wear a black and white square on their chests rather than the brown blue piece they had in the previous episode. It sort of feels like funeral attire to me. One of their legs is also this thin stump that gives them a slight limp, like they're carrying a weight around as they're grieving. And we do see Zooble with a more stump style leg in other episodes. This episode in particular, they are quite obvious with the limp that it gives Zooble. From the very beginning of the episode, Zooble is focused on the funeral, something that benefits the whole group and honors Kaufmo. Zooble is one of the coolest and kindest cast members. Next up, I can't resist talking about my favourite character, Kinga. I love characters who seem mad and crazy and insane, but their dialogue actually has like meaning and they're actually right about things. And Kinga is like the perfect example of this. This is episode 2. We don't know about Kinga's wife yet or his struggle with memory and memory returning to him in darkness. But it's still all depicted in the funeral scene. Kinga has this lucid line of dialogue when he tells Pomni, "It's the least we can do to honour their memory." This one line of dialogue has a lot of layers. Kinga himself has lost someone, as we know, and he also uses the word memory. When he later has the conversation in hell with Pomni in episode 3, once again, a crazy statement to make. He says that as long as Pomni has the memory of this conversation, then it happened, and that's all that matters. While Kinga struggles to hold on to memories himself, he believes that sharing it with the others in the circus is the way to preserve them. Lastly, when Kinga gives his speech for Kaufmo at the funeral, he says it with his eyes closed. He's seeking out darkness so he can better remember Kaufmo and honour his memory. Kinga is such a sweetheart, we love him. Let's talk about Gangle next. Gangle's only moment in this scene is to give her speech for Kaufmo. And when she gives her speech, she holds up a picture of her and Kaufmo. We know from later episodes that Gangle was an artist and enjoys drawing. While we might not know that yet, it's really clear looking at this art style in the picture that this is a picture that Gangle definitely drew of them. It's a super sweet drawing due to one key detail. Gangle is smiling, laughing even. We do see Gangle smile in the show, but it's often, small, sweet smiles when someone is supportive of her, or it's a big grin only shown when Gangle has her comedy mask, which never lasts for long. But this is a big grin where she's clearly laughing, showing how she felt around Kaufmo. We don't ever see Kaufmo before Abstraction, but we know from the clown design, the many references to not laughing at his jokes, that this was clearly a comedic clown character who was sometimes funny and a lot of times unfunny. Gangle mentions in the first episode that she hopes Kaufmo isn't still upset about her not laughing at his jokes. But here, in the memory of Kaufmo that she wants to preserve, she's laughing with him. This is how she wants to remember Kaufmo, or maybe a fond memory they had together. And it's a super sweet detail. Now let's talk about Ragatha. Ragatha is a surprisingly complex character. Ragatha is the only character that we get to hear their dialogue of during the funeral scene. Interestingly, Ragatha talks about how she always thinks she's prepared for these things. Then the picture's set up and she's already breaking. This really establishes how many other people Ragatha has seen abstract in the circus. It is also a little telling that Ragatha is the first to talk in this scene. That's not me trying to give her a read, but the more we see of Ragatha, the more we get the idea that her ideals of perfection don't just apply to herself. She's this peak of optimism, always seeking out kindness, but to an extent where she expects everyone else to share in her optimism, pretend like nothing's wrong. It's part of why she hates Jax. She thinks that having everyone get along as if nothing is wrong is the way to keep things together. The consequences of this are shown in her relationship with Pomni. Ragatha's cheer up attitude does nothing to comfort Pomni. Instead, it's her conversation with Kinga, where Kinga says, yeah, the circus can feel pointless, but brings up the point that it's by sticking together that they can survive it. Or even more light-hearted conversations with Jax, or moments where Jax questions whether Gangle is capable of being happy. Pomni's going through a lot, and the acknowledgement that, yeah, this is kind of messed up is more of a comfort than sweeping it under the rug. The funeral does showcase and foreshadow this. Ragatha tries to comfort Pomni about Gummy Goo by saying he'll probably show up in a future adventure. This doesn't actually acknowledge Pomni's current pain. She then invites Pomni to the funeral, and it's the funeral that makes Pomni feel better. Pomni didn't know Kaufmo, but Pomni in the last few days has suffered a lot of loss. The loss of her name, the loss of her previous life, the loss of her body, the loss of her reality. It acknowledges that bad things happen here, but shows what happens when they do. It shows Pomni that things will be okay, rather than just telling her. This funeral is an acknowledgement of loss where everything else has been bright colours and bread and circuses. Literally. At the end of the funeral, we get this flash of Pomni's nightmare again, where Pomni fears going insane, abstracting, and having no one remember her. And then we get this beautiful frame of everyone's hands reaching for her, stopping her from falling into insanity. I say everyone's, Jack's hand isn't there. The funeral is the first instance where Pomni relaxes for a moment. Now let's talk about the two characters who aren't at the funeral. We're going to talk about Jax first, and I need you to keep in mind what we learnt about him in episode 5 as we discuss this. And no, I'm not talking about the corn phobia. On the first watch, we assume that Jax skips the funeral because he's an asshole. It lines up with everything we've seen from him so far. He's cruel and doesn't care for the others, so why would he attend the funeral? There's the other presumption that maybe it's painful or uncomfortable for him in some way, but we didn't have a way of confirming that until now. I'm going to play this clip for you and watch it closely.
Just remember the people who abstract.
Now I'm going to play that same clip, but slowed down a little more, just so you can take it in.
Just remember the people who abstract.
His first expression is sad. He then looks to the side, more distant, then seems to remember where he is and turns to anger, storms away. That expression where his eyes go wide for a moment reminds me of the moment we got in episode 5, where Ragatha apologizes for bringing up that thing earlier. In this moment, Jax thinks of his abstracted lost friend, flecks that emotion of grief with anger, and walks away. He doesn't attend the funeral because it will remind him of his abstracted friend. Episode 5 establishes that Jax had a friend at some stage, and in the intermission scene we get this shot of Jax running down the hallway, stopping at a door with this friendly frog face that's been crossed out. All around the frame of this scene are abstracted eyes. This all implies Jax once upon a time had a friendly frog buddy in the circus who abstracted and left Jax. And this does explain quite a lot about his character. Having this clip that's like less than 2 seconds long and have it reflect something about the character that we don't learn until episode 5 sums up everything I love about this show. The layers to Jax we couldn't initially see have been there all along. The other character who doesn't attend the funeral, for more obvious reasons, is Caine. Caine doesn't get involved in any scenes that don't involve the adventures. Caine is hardwired to only understand things relevant to the circus or adventures. The character's personal feelings and experiences don't register with him. This shows in the way he disappears after everyone comes back. He explodes Gummy Goo, watches Pomni have a breakdown, and his response is to go and drink water. Because he hasn't done that in a while. You should go and drink water. Zooble also says the line of, finally he's gone, which implies that Zooble had to kind of step around Caine to set up the funeral. The only reason Caine has more interaction with Zooble than the others is because Zooble skips the adventures and he can't figure out for the life of him why, even though they've already told him. Caine being so heavily involved with the adventure of this episode and then dipping out for the character's funeral sums up a lot of his priorities, considering the funeral is for the creature that he just threw in the cellar. Caine is this mysterious force, and I'm very curious for when we learn more. And with that, my wonderful circus crew, that brings us to the end of my ramblings. That is my deep dive into Kaufmo's funeral scene, a short scene that packs a punch. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you did enjoy. If you want more Amazing Digital Circus video essays, please tell me any encouragement and I will do it. If you want to let me know that you want more Amazing Digital Circus, you can give the video a like to tell me that this is what you enjoy watching, or just leave it in the comments and maybe any suggestions. While you're in the comments, tell me any of your thoughts on this scene, any just fun details you've noticed in this show that you want to share. That's mainly why I made this video. There's just so many Easter eggs and little clues and little things you don't notice, and that's got me rubbing my little hands together. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, and your support. I will see you later. Bye bye!